You don't belong here. My mother-in-law's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the hushed elegance of the Whitmore Grand Ballroom, it carried like a blade. She leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, expensive, suffocating, and added, "Try not to embarrass my son tonight. These are important people." I smiled, the kind of smile you learn after 3 years of marriage into a family that never wanted you there. My husband Daniel was already across the room laughing with men in $10,000 suits. He hadn't heard. Or maybe he had, and looked away anyway. I was never quite sure which was worse. My name is Claire Holt. Or rather, Claire Mercer now, though his family had never fully accepted the name change as anything more than a technicality. I was 31, a structural engineer with a firm downtown, and according to my mother-in-law, Patricia Mercer, I was a perfectly nice girl who simply wasn't built for this world. The Whitmore Annual Innovation Gala was exactly the kind of event Patricia lived for. Black tie, catered by a Michelin-starred chef, attended by the architects, tech founders, and city officials who made up the Mercer family's social universe. Patricia had been on the organizing committee for 6 consecutive years. It was, as she often reminded me, her evening. I had attended every year since marrying Daniel, always in the background, always quiet, always careful not to reach for the wrong fork or laugh too loudly or offer an opinion when one wasn't requested. Tonight felt different, though. A tightness in my chest that I mistook for nerves. "Claire." Patricia touched my arm as a silver-haired man approached our table. "This is Governor Aldrich. He's been a dear friend of the family for 20 years. She smiled warmly at him and added, without so much as a pause, "And this is Daniel's wife. She works in construction, I believe." The governor extended his hand with practiced politeness. I shook it. "Structural engineering," I said quietly. Patricia laughed, soft and dismissive. "Yes, something like that." The governor moved on. Daniel materialized at my elbow for exactly 45 seconds before someone called his name, and he drifted away again like smoke. I sat down. I picked up my water glass. I breathed. Patricia settled beside her oldest friend, Margaret, 2 seats down, and I heard her murmur, "She's a sweet girl, but Daniel married for love, not strategy. What can you do?" Margaret made a sympathetic sound. I looked at the chandeliers. Hundreds of crystals, each one catching light and throwing it somewhere else entirely. I thought about the past 8 months. The late nights. The blueprint spread across our kitchen table while Daniel slept. The calls I had taken in parking garages between client meetings. The moment 6 weeks ago when the Whitmore Committee chair, a woman named Dr. Simone Park, had shaken my hand and said, "This design is going to change the conversation, Claire. I mean that." Dr. Park didn't know I was a Mercer by marriage. I had submitted my proposal under Holt's Engineering Solutions, my maiden name, my firm, my work. It hadn't been a strategy. It had simply been mine, and I had wanted to keep it that way. Clean and separate from the complicated geography of being Daniel's wife. The Gala program sat on the table in front of me. I hadn't opened it. I should have opened it. The evening moved through its familiar rhythms: cocktails, seating, the first course, polite applause for a donation announcement. Patricia held court at the center of the table, gracious and glittering. Daniel told a story I had heard 4 times. I smiled in the right places. Then the room's light shifted, warm gold dimming to something more focused, and the program director stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, the Whitmore Foundation is proud to announce the winner of this year's Infrastructure Innovation Grant, a $50 million commitment to the project our selection committee unanimously agreed represents the future of sustainable urban design." Patricia straightened, pleased. The grant had been discussed at every committee meeting for months. She had championed a proposal from a firm her college friend's son ran. The recipient of the 2025 Whitmore Infrastructure Grant is Holt Engineering Solutions. For the Meridian Adaptive Bridge System, a self-calibrating suspension design that reduces material waste by 40% and has already been adopted by 3 city governments for upcoming projects. The room filled with applause. I did not move. "Would the lead architect please come to the stage? Ms. Claire Holt." Patricia's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. I stood. My chair made a soft sound against the marble floor, and the people at our table turned, one by one, with expressions I would remember for the rest of my life. Confusion. Recalculation. Something in Patricia's eyes that I had never seen before, a sudden, total stillness, like a clock that had just stopped. Daniel stared at me. I walked to the stage. My heels were quiet on the steps. Dr. Yu Park met me at the podium with a handshake that became something warmer, a brief clasp of both hands, and then I was standing at the microphone with 500 faces looking up at me and the chandeliers throwing their fractured light across everything. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. I had not planned a speech. I've been coming to this gala for 3 years. I sat at that table over there and I listened and I learned and I was very, very quiet. A gentle laugh moved through the crowd. It turns out that quiet is a good place to build things from. More laughter. Genuine. Warm. I didn't look at Patricia. I didn't need to. This design exists because I believed that infrastructure should adapt to people, not the other way around. I'm grateful to the Whitmore Foundation for believing the same thing. And I'm grateful to everyone in this room who never once asked me to sit down. The applause that followed was not polite. It was the kind that fills the chest. When I stepped off the stage, Dr. Park walked beside me. Governor Aldrich intercepted us near the base of the steps. "Ms. Verpark." "Holt," he said, and there was nothing perfunctory in his tone now. "I'd like to schedule a conversation with your firm. We have 3 infrastructure projects in the planning stage, and I'd like your eyes on them." I handed him my card. It said Claire Holt, Principal Engineer, Holt Engineering Solutions. No mention of Mercer, no mention of the table I had just walked away from. He read it and nodded. "I'll have my office call Monday." When I returned to the table, the silence had a texture to it. Margaret was studying her napkin. Daniel's jaw was set in a way I recognized, not anger exactly, but the rigid blankness of someone recalibrating very quickly. Patricia had not moved. Her program sat open in front of her, and I could see from my seat that she had turned to the page with the grant announcement. My photo was there. My name. Holt Engineering Solutions. She looked up at me. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something gracious. "People can surprise you. You should have told us," she said. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. "This is a family event. The Mercers had been involved with this foundation for 15 years. You used our connections. I didn't use anyone's connections," I said. I sat down and picked up my fork. "I submitted a proposal. The committee selected it. I didn't know you were involved until I saw the program an hour ago." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" She looked at Daniel. He looked at his plate. "The point," Patricia said carefully, "is that this is embarrassing." I set my fork down. 3 hours ago you told me not to embarrass your son. In front of the governor. I kept my voice low and even. "I've been coming to this event for 3 years. 3 years of being introduced as Daniel's wife who works in construction. Tonight I won the largest grant this foundation has ever awarded and you're embarrassed." I looked at her steadily. "I think we mean very different things by that word." The table next to ours had gone very quiet. Patricia didn't answer. She lifted her wine glass and looked toward the stage as though something there required her attention. Daniel finally spoke. "Claire." "Not now," I said, and I meant it gently because I was not angry. I was something past anger in a place that felt remarkably like solid ground. The press found me near the dessert course. 2 journalists, a photographer, a woman from an architecture publication who said my name with the emphasis on Holt and asked how a self-calibrating suspension design had come out of a firm most people in the industry hadn't heard of yet. "Most people don't hear the quieter firms," I told her. "That doesn't mean we aren't building things." The photo they ran the next morning showed me at the podium, mid-sentence, looking entirely at ease. The headline read, "Unknown firm stuns. Whitmore Gala. Secures $50 million. Grant, who is Claire Holt?" By noon, my inbox had 97 new messages. By evening, 3 of them were from firms that had previously declined to partner with Holt Engineering because, as one had written at the time, "Your portfolio doesn't yet reflect the scale we require." Daniel called at 7. I let it ring. Not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I simply needed one evening where I wasn't managing someone else's reaction to my life. He texted at 9. "Can we talk?" I texted back, "Tomorrow." He came over the following afternoon. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where I had spread my blueprints for 8 months while he asked when dinner would be ready, and he was quiet for a long time before he said, "I didn't know how big it was." "I know," I said. "I should have asked." "Yes." He looked at his hands. "My mother called me 4 times this morning. Investors have been calling her, asking about you. She doesn't know what to do with that." "That's not my problem to solve," I said, not unkindly. "Just clearly." He looked up. Something in his face shifted, like a man who has been looking at a map upside down for a very long time and has only just realized it. "No," he said quietly. "I guess it isn't. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. Some things had been building too long and sat too deep to be resolved over one conversation at a kitchen table. But we were honest, maybe for the first time in a long while, and honesty is where real things start." 3 weeks passed. The Meridian project moved into its next phase. Governor Aldrich's office called on Monday as promised, and by the end of that week, I had signed a consulting agreement that tripled my firm's revenue projections for the year. Patricia called on a Thursday morning. I was in a site meeting and let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, standing outside on a steel gray afternoon, her voice was different. Stripped of its social register, smaller, and somehow more real for it. "Claire, I've been thinking about what you said at the gala, about what embarrassing means." A pause. "I think I owe you a conversation, if you're willing." I listened to it twice. I called her back the next day. We met at a coffee shop near her house, the kind of place she would not normally choose. No tablecloths, no sommelier, paper cups. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her hands wrapped around a coffee she hadn't drunk, looking smaller than I had ever seen her look in a ballroom. "I introduced you as a construction worker for 3 years, she said, before I had even sat down fully. "I didn't ask. I assumed, and then I repeated the assumption until it became the story. "Yes," I said. "That was wrong of me." I looked at her. The apology was real. I could tell, the way you can always tell when something costs someone. Patricia Mercer was a woman who had spent her entire adult life managing how things appeared, and sitting in a paper cup coffee shop admitting she had been wrong was not a small thing for her. "It was," I said. "And I accept that." She exhaled. "I also want you to know, and I realize this is late, that what you've built is extraordinary, not as my daughter-in-law, as an engineer, as a person." I wrapped my hands around my own cup. "Thank you." "Daniel loves you," she said. "He's an idiot about showing it, and that's my fault more than his. I raised him to believe that love was something you received, not something you practiced." She looked out the window. "I'm trying to unteach myself the same lesson." We sat there for an hour. We didn't become best friends. We didn't hug at the door. But when we parted, something had shifted. Not into warmth exactly, but into honesty, and sometimes that's the stronger foundation. Daniel and I spent the following months in a different kind of conversation than the one we've been having. He started asking about my work, not politely, but actually, sitting down with my project specs and saying, "Walk me through this," and meaning it. He came to a site visit in November, stood in a hard hat looking up at the Meridian installation, and said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, "How did you know it would hold?" "Calculations," I told him, "and 3 years of people underestimating the load I could carry." He looked at me then, really looked, the way you do when you're seeing something you realize you missed for too long. "I'm sorry, Claire." "I know," I said. "Keep showing me." He did. 6 months after the Whitmore Gala, Holt Engineering Solutions was named one of the top 20 emerging firms in sustainable infrastructure by Architectural Digest. The Meridian Adaptive Bridge System was featured in a 4-page spread with photographs that I sent to my mother, who printed them and hung them in her kitchen. The night the issue came out, Daniel took me to dinner. Not a Mercer family event, not a networking function, just the two of us at a restaurant I had wanted to try for 2 years and somehow never gotten to. He ordered the wine and asked me what I thought of it and listened to my answer. Patricia saw the AD feature. She sent me a text, just 4 words, "I am so proud." I sat with that for a long time. I had spent years waiting for those words, adjusting myself, softening my voice, arriving at galas in navy dresses and trying to take up exactly the right amount of space. waiting for the people in my orbit to look over and see what I already knew was there. The strange thing about finally receiving what you've been waiting for is that it doesn't arrive the way you imagined. It doesn't fill the space that the waiting created. It just sits there, small and honest, and you have to decide what to do with it. I texted back, "Thank you." That means something, and it did. Not everything it once would have, but something real. The following spring, the Whitmore Foundation asked me to join their selection committee. The invitation came addressed to Claire Holt, principal engineer, my name, the one I had always been, before and after and underneath every other name anyone had tried to give me. I accepted. At the first committee meeting, a young woman presented a proposal for an adaptive flood barrier system. She was maybe 27, nervous, clearly brilliant, and she apologized twice in the first minute for taking up everyone's time. I waited until she had finished. Then I said, "Don't apologize. You have 40 minutes on the agenda and your design deserves every one of them. Start from the beginning and take your time." She looked up, startled. Then she nodded and stood a little straighter. Some things you learn from being told to sit quietly long enough. You learn exactly what it costs. And you learn, if you're paying attention, that the most important thing you can do when you finally get to stand is make sure the room is a little wider for the person standing behind you. I hadn't planned any of it that way. Not the gala, not the grant, not the slow and imperfect rebuilding of my marriage, or the harder, quieter work of relearning how to exist in a family that had first tried to make me invisible. But looking back at the thread of it, the 8 months of blueprints on the kitchen table, the walk to the podium in a room that hadn't known my name, the coffee shop with a woman who was trying, late, to be better, I could trace the shape of something I couldn't have named while I was living it. The respect I had was mine, not given, not granted at a banquet table by someone who'd finally decided I was worth the acknowledgement. Earned in the hours no one saw, built on foundations I had laid myself. Load-bearing and true, and when I walked into that committee room in the spring and called a young woman by her name and told her to take her time, that was mine too. That, more than any grant or headline or standing ovation, was the thing I had been building toward. There's something nobody tells you about being underestimated for a long time. After a while, you stop fighting it. You learn to move quietly through rooms that weren't built to hold you, and you pour everything you have into the work instead. Not to prove something, but because the work is the one place where the truth of what you are can't be argued with. That's what I did. For 8 months, while my mother-in-law introduced me as a construction worker at dinner parties, while my husband drifted toward the men in expensive suits and forgot to look back, I was at the kitchen table with blueprints and calculations and a design I believed in completely. I wasn't building it for the gala. I wasn't building it for the grant. I was building it because it was right, and because doing the right work with full attention is the only thing I've ever known how to do. What happened at the Whitmore Gala wasn't luck, and it wasn't revenge, even though I understand why it might look like both from the outside. It was simply the moment when everything I had done in private became visible to people who hadn't been paying attention. The work didn't change that night. Only the audience did. I think about what it cost Patricia to sit in that coffee shop and say the words she said. She had spent decades building a version of the world where appearances were load-bearing walls, where who you were at a dinner table mattered as much as what you could actually do. Admitting she had been wrong wasn't a small thing. It was, in its own way, an act of construction too. Tearing down a structure you built yourself is harder than building something new. And Daniel had loved me in the way people love things they've stopped truly seeing. Familiarity without attention. The months after the gala were uncomfortable and honest and necessary, and what came out of them was something sturdier than what we'd had before. Not perfect, but real. Built on actual ground instead of assumption. Here is what I understand now. Standing on the other side of it, the people who try to make you small are usually protecting something they're afraid of losing. Patricia wasn't cruel because she was strong. She was cruel because she was afraid that my strength would rearrange something in her world. She was right. It did. And she survived it, and so did we. And the rearrangement turned out to be better for everyone. The actions we take, the quiet ones, the ones no one sees, the hours of honest work and the choice to keep going when it would be easier to shrink, they accumulate. They build towards something. Not always on our timeline, not always in the room we expected, but they do not disappear. What you put in, patiently and with integrity, has a way of finding the surface eventually, I didn't walk to that podium to humiliate anyone. I walked to it because the work earned it and because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else's permission to take up space. That shift, from waiting to simply being, is the one I hope stays with me long after the headlines fade and the grant money is spent and the chandeliers at the Whitmore are sparkling for someone else entirely. You don't need the room to already believe in you. You just need to keep building until the room has no choice but to see what you've made.